So in this video I'm looking at UVLayout's packing tool, and in particular the wrapping option. So I've got a file here. So a really simple torus just to demonstrate the principle to start with, and then I'll bring in a more interesting model to finish off. So here I've got 5 shells here, just some basic quarter sections there, and a really long thin rectangle there. So let's just try and pack that. So very quickly you can see that's the best packing we're going to get on that, because this long rectangle there has to be like that to fit into the UV square, and then all the rest of this is wasted space. The rest of the shells sort of just fit in there, but all that is going to be wasted memory. So it's not a very efficient packing, and I can look at that by turning on coverage here. So only 12% of that square is being covered by the geometry there, so very inefficient. So one way to get slightly better packing here is to rotate this onto the diagonal. So I can either do that manually, or I'll just undo that and under rotate here, select 45, and then try again. And so I'll just stop that there. So it's gone from 12%, I think it was, now to 21% coverage. So that's, doubled the efficiency, but still 21% coverage is not very good. So what's the answer here? Well, you can try wrapping, and so what that is, if I just demonstrate that with one of these other shells, and I'll just say allow wrapping there. So what that's doing is when you load a texture map, what I'll do is I'll load a texture map. So here we've got concrete and a wood concrete texture thing happening there. When I apply this texture to some geometry, if the UVs go outside the 0 to 1 square, then that texture will repeat. I can show you what that means by here. So the texture repeats infinitely, depending on where the UVs are for that shell. So you can use this technique to get better packing, and I'll show you how. One thing I should mention is, to do this, your textures have to be seamless. So that means that as they repeat, they've been designed so that they smoothly transition across that line. So the left-hand side of the texture there, over here, seamlessly joins up with the right-hand side. So as it repeats, there's no obvious seam in the texture. So as long as you've got that in your texture maps, then you can use this technique. So let's turn that off, and I'll just reset that, and I'll turn coverage off. I'll show that later on. So let's try packing again with allowing wrapping. So without rotation here, I'll turn the rotation off. It's still not going to do much, because this shell, even with wrapping on, because of the orientation there, it can't, it'll collide back with itself. If I turn this around, you can see it repeats, and if I reduce the size of the UV square, it's repeating and then overlapping with itself on the other side. So you have to allow some rotation in this case. So I'll do 2 degrees, and I will do pack all, and see what we get. So now it's randomly rotating things, and already you can see just from there that everything looks a whole lot more compact. And we'll just let it run for a little bit longer, and then I'll explain the results. So I'll stop that. Alright, so here we have the coverage. So now we've got like 65% coverage. So it went from 12% to 20%, now to 65%. So huge improvement. And that's simply because we've allowed this long skinny rectangle here, we've packed it with the allow wrapping option. So that means we're allowing it to extend from beyond the 0 to 1 square, and it wraps around here into the available space. So it has to, it can't just overlap, it has to overlap where there's space on the other side, so that's taken into account. So that's the wrapping option for packing explained. And so now I'll just quickly show a couple of other things you might want to consider while we've got the simple one up, and then I'll load the more interesting model again in a sec. So here we've got this is wrapping, but also this shell here is wrapped, it's extended beyond the UV square, and it wraps around onto the other side, which we've allowed that to happen here. But it might be, you only want the wrapping to occur on that one shell and not these other sort of simpler ones. So the way I could probably just do this by hand to fix that up, but if you had something a bit more complicated with a lot more shells and you didn't want to have to hand manipulate them, one trick is to load a trace map here that restrains the packing, and that's this trace mask option here in packing. So I'll show you how to do that. So if I just show this, so this this texture looks like just a white square, but if I zoom in here, you can see everything's white except for one black line down the bottom, could be at the top, wherever. So what that's doing is telling UVLayout that when we use it as a mask here, that we can pack everything we want in here, but nothing can go where that black line is. So when we've got wrapping on, it means that no shells can wrap around on the this direction. They can wrap horizontally, but they can't wrap vertically. So let's select that file, so it displays it there. And if I repack now with that, I've got to make sure I turn the mask on so that it uses that trace image as a mask for packing. If I redo that, so I'm just sort of sorting things out. So I'll just stop it there. Alright, so now it's repacked everything, and nothing is crossing this line here, so it can't wrap vertically, so it can only wrap horizontally. So again, if I show this texture, so that's what you'd use in this case. So this texture is seamlessly horizontal, but obviously not seamless vertical if we only want things to wrap in the horizontal direction, not vertical. Alright, so another, just while I'm here, again, we might just want this long one to wrap, but not these other ones. We want to keep them contained within the UV square. That might be because we've only got that texture for this one seamless, but not these other ones. So again, I can try and move these things around and do it by hand. I'm not, I could spend a while trying to work that out, or I can try this. If I select, again, you have to sort of make this yourself in a paint box, but what I've done is made this trace image or mask so that by putting a black line at the top and a black line down the side, we're saying we're going to allow things to wrap horizontally in this bottom quarter or third, but in this top section nothing can go over the edge of the top or the side there. So again, if I demonstrate that, you'll see how it works. Oops. And I'll repack. And I will stop it there. So you can see what's happened now is that this long rectangle is slotted in down the bottom section there where it's allowed to wrap around, but because we've got that black line in the trace mask, none of these shells can wrap. Like that one wouldn't be allowed to be there because of the black line there. It's like a wall or a constriction. So then if I load our wooden concrete one there, we've got all these things in the concrete section and this one down in the wood. I might just tweak that by hand a bit, just so it's within the wood, and I can move that one so it's in the concrete. So there's we've packed that now with wrapping, and if I just demonstrate this, I select that one polygon there. So if I bring this up, so that polygon there, which is this one here, is crossing the UV square, but there's no obvious seam in the texture map there if I unhide the green there. So it's like a seamless transition as it wraps around. That's because the texture itself is seamless, but you can, so that's the texture wrapping. If you've got seamless textures, you can do this sort of thing to get much more compact packing. So obviously I've set this torus up to sort of demonstrate this in the extreme case, but let's load something a bit more normal and try it on there. So let's go here. So here's our Leon character. There's my shells already packed into 2x2 texture space. Now what I'm going to do is try and repack that with wrapping turned on. So I'll just turn rotate off initially and we'll see what happens. Alright, so pack all. Right, so there it's done that. So you can see here it's repacked everything, and here we've got now some of our shells are overlapping the tiles and wrapping around because we've allowed that. So what I will do, I forgot to explain something, I'll just undo that. So if you want to see that you're getting improvement, you can turn on again the tile coverage, but because here we've got multiple tiles, it can be a bit confusing to sort of really add them all up and average them and everything like that. So one thing you can do is open up the move scale rotate here and look at the size. So down here, so this is excuse me, this is the length of the UV square in the sort of geometry units of the original model. So here we're looking at the 35.78, so that's the packing that I had without wrapping. And if I just get that and repack, so if you remember, it's 35.78, and if I go back here, we've got down to 34. So from 35 to 34, so we're getting a slight improvement by allowing wrapping. And then if I turn on rotate here and repack again, so I've only allowed myself 30 seconds here. If you let that run for, you know, maybe even 5 minutes or whatever, you might get better, but just for the demo I'll do a quick pack with rotation on. So it's found another better one, so I'll just stop it there. Right, so here you can see it's rotated things around. So we went from what's 35 to 34, now we're down to 33. So we're gradually incrementally improving the packing efficiency. So it's not significant. So for this particular model, by turning wrapping on, we're getting a bit of improvement, but not a huge amount. So really, whether that pays off for you or not, it depends on the model, really, the shells. But anyway, while I'm here, I will explain a couple other things. So when we've got multiple tiles here, so I've got 2x2, so normally it would pack everything into just these 2x2 tiles here, but because we've got wrapping on, it's spaced them out a bit just so you can see what's going on. Because if I'll show you, if I move that to there, you can see it's getting quite confusing because these shells look like they're overlapping, but because we've enabled wrapping, they're not actually overlapping. So so that's the reason why these things are spaced out, is just so it's easier to see what's going on and you're not getting confused with things overlapping that aren't really overlapping. Right, so that's that. Now, one other thing you might want to do when you've done this is, so we can see here that by rotating things around and allowing the wrapping, we're getting a slight improvement, but it might be that on some of these tiles, maybe even this one for example, possibly with a rearrangement of these tiles, we might be able to still get everything in there without any of this overlapping of the edges. So that might be advantageous to not use the wrapping in some of these tiles and only sort of leave it in where it's really essential. So currently with the packing, allow wrapping is either on for all tiles or off for all tiles, so you can't selectively say wrapping only on particular tiles. But what you can do is bring up the move, scale, rotate tool here and the fit to square here. So what that's going to do is go through each of these tiles now and refit everything without wrapping. So it's sort of like a packing that you do after you've done this packing. It's probably best if I just run it and then you'll see what's going to happen. Now, normally fit to square will go through each tile here, refit them into the square, and it can either scale them up or scale them down just to make so it's always going to fit them by default, whether you're increasing the resolution or reducing the resolution. But in this case, we may decide, or which what I would normally do is if I select the greater than here under that option, what that's saying is when I run this fit to square tool, which refits each tile, it will only change the arrangement of those shells if we get an improvement in the resolution. So that means if it refits them and can scale them up to fit them in the tile, then that's okay, but we don't want to refit these and have to scale them down. Anyway, I'll show you what that means by running it. So I would recommend selecting greater than there, and I click fit to square, and it will go through. I'll just quickly explain another thing about fit to square is because it's repacking each of those tiles, it uses the options for the packing tool here. So that includes if you've got rotation turned on, and also the duration. So here I've set the duration to 30 seconds. That means because we've got 4 tiles here, it's going to spend 1/4 of the time on each of the tiles for the rotation testing. So you might want to increase that if you want to give each a bit more time on each tile, but because we're just doing a demo, I'll leave it at 30 seconds there. Alright, so let's run it and see what happens. Alright, so it's refitting this tile now and rearranging things with the rotation just to see if it can fit everything in that tile without any wrapping. And so it just stopped there and it reset it back to what it was originally because it couldn't find a better solution. This one, because yep, so that one has improved. You can see because the grey shells here, which are the wrapped sort of ghost images, if there's none of those left, then it means it has made an improvement. And this one looks like it's going to do the same again as well. Alright, so by running that fit to square afterwards, it's concluded that this tile is not going to improve by rearranging things. We have to leave the wrapping on there to get that sort of degree of packing. But these other, and the same for that one, but these other 2 tiles, we could rearrange things and still get those particular shells in that tile without any wrapping. So that might be advantageous to minimize the amount of wrapping, only use it where it's really essential, and sort of not bother with it where you can get away without it. Right, so that's quite a long video explaining the wrapping option, but In this particular example, it didn't really make a huge difference. In the torus one, it made an enormous difference. So it just depends on your particular model whether the wrapping option is something worth doing. But again, it's just there, something to try, and if it improves it, then that's great. If it doesn't, you can just undo. Alright, so that's the packing tool there and the wrapping option.